Why did the colonel look at her like she didn't belong? Why, after 3 years of proving herself, did it feel like she was invisible again? Corporal Kellick kept her eyes steady, even as the Marine colonel's words stung sharper than any round she'd ever fired. He told her she had no business behind a .50 caliber rifle, said she should stick to communications, said that's where pretty girls belonged. It was the kind of remark that wasn't new to her, but it still landed like a weight pressed against her chest. Around the briefing tent, Marines shifted in their seats. Some looked down. A few smirked quietly as if they'd been thinking the same thing but never said it out loud. Didn't move. Didn't argue. Didn't let them see what she felt. She simply sat, headset coiled at her side, jaw locked, waiting for the colonel to move on. 3 hours later, those same words would echo back in his mind when Navy SEALs, pinned down in the fog, realized their survival came down to one weapon, and one Marine he had dismissed without a second thought. But that moment hadn't come yet. Right now, all had was the sting of silence. She adjusted the straps on her vest, pretending to focus on the communications gear spread out neatly across her table. Wires coiled, systems tested, redundancies built into every channel. Everything was perfect just the way she liked it. Control in the small details, because out there, beyond the wire, nothing was ever in her control. At 26, had already seen enough to know appearances never told the truth. Her small frame, the quiet way she carried herself, the long braid tucked beneath her cover, none of it revealed what she was capable of. She was a radio operator, yes, but she was also more. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Fewer believed it. Grew up on a ranch outside Billings, Montana, out where the sky stretched endless and mornings smelled of grass heavy with dew. Her grandfather, Korean War veteran, Marine sniper, was the one who raised her after her parents, lives unraveled in a haze of divorce and distance. Every morning before school, he'd wake her before sunrise. They'd walk together into the pasture where rusted fence posts leaned under the weight of time. There, he had set up targets, tin cans, old bottles, painted steel plates that rang like bells when struck. He started her on a .22, small rifle, light recoil. He taught her how to breathe, how to wait, how not to chase the trigger but let the shot come to her. Calm hands, quiet heart, that's what makes a shooter, he used to tell her. By the time she was 16, she was hitting 800-yard shots with a hunting rifle that looked older than her. Neighbors laughed when they saw her carry it, too big for her size. Then they stopped laughing when they saw what she could do. That steadiness, that patience, it never left her. But when she enlisted in the Marines, they didn't see it. They saw her scores, her communications expertise, and they slotted her into a role that kept her behind radios instead of rifles. Radios mattered. Radios saved lives. She took pride in that. But every time someone told her she wasn't cut out for combat, every time they assumed her value ended at a keyboard and headset, something inside her tightened. She had qualified expert on every weapon system she touched. At camp, her instructors whispered that she had a natural gift with long rifles. One sergeant even pulled her aside after training and told her she should pursue Scout Sniper School. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But slots were limited. The Corps needed comms, and so Kellick became the most reliable radio operator in her battalion. Invisible, indispensable, but invisible. That morning in Afghanistan's province, as dawn broke over forward operating base, Shank sat in the comms tent, headset pressed to her ear. Radio chatter rolled in like overlapping waves. Units checking in. Convoys moving through valleys. Helicopters reporting fuel levels. 1,000 voices carrying the pulse of a war stretched across mountains that seemed designed to swallow men whole. His mind moved in rhythm with the static. She heard what others missed. Subtle shifts in tone, cracks in the feed that signaled interference before it broke. To most, it was just noise. To her, it was music. But even then, her mind wasn't just on the radios. She couldn't stop thinking about the M107 locked in the armory. The rifle she'd begged time on during sniper platoon rotations. The rifle she could feel in her bones as if it belonged to her hands. She knew its weight, its recoil, the way it kicked against her shoulder, not as violence but as power transferred, controlled. That morning, as she checked frequencies, she remembered her grandfather's words again. Calm hands, quiet heart. Then came the briefing. Colonel's voice cut through the tent like a blade. The mission was clear. Navy SEALs would insert into the Tangi Valley, attempt to rescue a captured Army medic. The terrain was jagged, visibility limited. The operation was high risk. Tracked every word, already mapping out how she'd keep the comms clear, how she'd maintain constant feed between units moving in and the birds circling above. She knew she could handle it. Then the colonel's eyes landed on her. He asked Staff Sergeant Torres, who was running long-range comms. Torres said her name, frowned. "What about weapons?" he asked. Torres mentioned her qualifications, her time on her expert scores. The colonel cut him off, dismissed it, said communications, Marines should focus on communications. He didn't want untested personnel in precision roles, not on this mission, not today. Felt her face burn. The words weren't just about doubting her, they dismissed her very existence. She wanted to say something, wanted to stand and tell him what she'd done, what she could do. But she knew better. Words wouldn't change a mind like his. And so she sat, still as stone, while judgment passed over her like she wasn't even there. Later, back in the comms tent, she cleaned her service rifle in silence. Not that she wasn't authorized to touch that today, but her standard issue. Her hands moved automatically, snapping metal against metal in smooth rhythm. It was a language she knew by heart. She thought of all the times she'd been underestimated. Boot camp, when drill instructors slotted her into admin until her rifle scores forced them to take another look. Her first duty station, when senior Marines bet she couldn't keep up on field ops until she outlasted them on forced marches. Every time the same story. Quiet woman, small frame, easy to dismiss, until she was. It wasn't the insult that cut deepest. It was the risk. Because if things went bad tomorrow, if those SEALs needed someone steady on the trigger, she knew she could be the difference, and no one would let her. Her grandfather's voice echoed again in her mind. The best shooters don't need to convince anyone. They just wait. When the moment comes, they'll know. That night lay awake in her cot, headset on the table beside her, rifle broken down in pieces she'd cleaned twice already. Outside, the Afghan night spread endless and silent, broken only by distant rotors cutting through the air. She closed her eyes. She saw the targets lined up on the Montana pasture. She saw her grandfather's weathered hands guiding hers. She remembered the stillness between heartbeats before the shot. Sleep came in fragments, restless, heavy. By morning, the fog rolled in. Why did the valley feel like it was breathing? Why did the fog seem alive, curling through the jagged ridges as if waiting for something to happen? Leaned forward over the console, headset pressed against her ear, her eyes never leaving the map display. Call signs flickered across her screen, green blips tracking movement across terrain that was anything but forgiving. Neptune 4, the SEAL team, had just been dropped by helicopter at dawn. Their boots hit dirt in silence, but even silence carried risk in a valley that swallowed sound like an ocean. Her pencil traced notes on a pad beside her hand. Distances, bearings, environmental changes. She didn't need to write most of it. Her memory was razor sharp, but the act kept her calm. Hands busy, mind focused. The first transmissions came steady, measured. The SEALs moved along their insertion route, breath low and even. She could hear the tension in their voices, but also the confidence. These were men who had done this 100 times. To them, the valley was another hostile maze. Sitting far behind wire and sandbags, it was an unfolding mystery. She whispered range estimates under her breath. 12 clicks southeast. Elevation gain 400 feet. Thin air, colder temperatures. a valley that ran narrow, flanked by ridges perfect for concealment. Perfect for an ambush. Her fingers tightened on her pencil. She knew the signs. She had read every report from previous missions in this valley. Fighters here were patient. They knew the terrain better than anyone. They knew how to wait. She didn't say anything yet. Doubt always spoke first in whispers, and she'd learned not to let whispers control her. Neptune 4 approaching compound, establishing overwatch. The team leader's voice was calm, professional, but something in the way his breath broke on the last word made sit up. Overwatch meant they had eyes on the target, and in this fog, that was almost impossible. She adjusted her headset. Static hissed. A faint pop cracked through the line, maybe interference, maybe something else. Then the silence came, not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that pressed in from all sides. Her grandfather used to say silence was never neutral. It was either a gift or a warning. Neptune 4, breach in 5. The words came clipped, professional. She scribbled the time in her notes. Her heart beat faster, out of rhythm with her breath. Then it happened. Gunfire, sudden, violent, muffled in the fog but unmistakable. Short bursts, then the low, thudding echo of something heavier. Her pencil snapped in her hand. Neptune 4, contact left ridge, multiple shooters. The voices overlapped now, shouting, gunfire cracking against stone. The calm was gone, replaced by urgency, by the edge of panic. Designated marksman down. Repeat, our sniper is down. Froze, the words cut like glass. Their sniper was hit. The one man meant to cover them from range, gone in the first wave. Static ripped through her headset as overlapping voices collided, stepping on each other. She adjusted dials, filtering, separating. She could hear the team leader barking orders, could hear the ragged edge in a younger operator's voice as he called out enemy positions. She could hear rounds slamming into rock close enough to make their mics pop with each impact. The colonel was packing in the command tent now. Didn't need to look to know. She could feel his boots thudding against the dirt floor behind her. "What's their status?" he demanded. His voice stayed calm, pinned on all sides, sniper down, requesting precision support. The colonel swore under his breath. He knew what she knew. No sniper teams were close enough to help. Air support was grounded in the fog. Artillery was a no-go with the hostage inside the compound. For a second, the operations center was filled with nothing but the sound of gunfire bleeding through radio waves. Men's lives echoing into static. Neptune 4 to base, we're taking heavy fire. We need relief. We can't maneuver. His eyes locked on the map. She could see it like she was there. Ridge lines flanking both sides. Enemy muzzle flashes invisible to the naked eye but painting streaks across her imagination. The seals caught in the trough, unable to pull back, unable to push forward. Her throat went dry. She knew this pattern. She studied it. The valley was a kill box and they were trapped inside it. Something in her chest shifted. A familiar calm, the same she used to feel when she lay in the Montana grass, rifle stock pressed to her cheek, waiting for breath and trigger to meet. She stood slowly, deliberately. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, turning toward Tors, "I can do it." He looked at her like he knew exactly what she meant. The colonel turned, scowling. "Do what?" His voice didn't shake. "Provide precision fire support." The colonel's face went red. "Sit down, Corporal. You're needed on comms." "The fog is lifting on the eastern ridge," she said, calm, firm. "I've studied the map. 850 meters from here I'll have a line of sight. I can reach them." "Absolutely not," snapped. "This is combat, not the rifle range. You're not walking out there to play sniper." Tors hesitated. His eyes darted to the operations map, to the rising number of red markers where Neptune 4 was pinned, to the wounded tally growing faster than he could track. Staff Sergeant pressed, "If we wait, they die." Her words landed like stone dropped in water. Ripples moved through the tent. Even the colonel hesitated for a beat too long. Neptune 4, ammo's low, we're losing ground here. The desperation in that voice didn't belong to men who doubted themselves. It belonged to men who knew the math had turned against them. Torres made the call, quiet, steady, check out the go. For the first time in hours felt her heart steady, not race, steady. She moved quickly but not rushed, every step rehearsed in her mind 100 times. Into the armory, hands on the heavy rifle. She knew its weight instantly, balanced it like an extension of herself. Ammunition strapped to her vest. Scope adjusted before she even cleared the threshold. She stepped into the fog. The air was cool, damp. It clung to her skin, muffled every sound. She climbed toward the ridge, each step careful, deliberate. Her body moved like it had on the ranch fields years ago, quiet, practiced. Her breath slowed. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, but not from fear, from focus. 850 meters. She'd already done the math. The wind whispered across her face, shifting the edge of the fog just enough to show her the shapes. Muzzle flashes, faint but there. She dropped flat against the dirt, unpacked the bipod, mounted the rifle settled into her shoulder like it was always meant to be there. Through the scope, the world sharpened. Enemy silhouettes crouched along, hidden to the naked eye. She could see their muzzle flashes like stars in the morning haze. She tracked the closest one, machine gunner, pinning Neptune's movement. Her finger brushed the trigger. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her chest, calm hands, quiet heart. She exhaled slowly and squeezed. The valley thundered. Why did the valley feel like it was breathing? Why did the fog seem alive, curling through the jagged ridges as if waiting for something to happen? Leaned forward over the console, headset pressed against her ear, her eyes never leaving the map display. Call signs flickered across her screen, green blips tracking movement across terrain that was anything but forgiving. Neptune 4, the SEAL team, had just been dropped by helicopter at dawn. Their boots hit dirt in silence, but even silence carried risk in a valley that swallowed sound like an ocean. Her pencil traced notes on a pad beside her hand. Distances, bearings, environmental changes. She didn't need to write most of it. Her memory was razor sharp, but the act kept her calm. Hands busy, mind focused. The first transmissions came steady, measured. The SEALs moved along their insertion route, breath low and even. She could hear the tension in their voices, but also the confidence. These were men who had done this 100 times. To them, the valley was another hostile maze. Sitting far behind wire and sandbags, it was an unfolding mystery. She whispered range estimates under her breath. 12 clicks southeast. Elevation gain 400 feet. Thin air, colder temperatures. A valley that ran narrow, flanked by ridges perfect for concealment. Perfect for an ambush. Her fingers tightened on her pencil. She knew the signs. She had read every report from previous missions in this valley. Fighters here were patient. They knew the terrain better than anyone. They knew how to wait. She didn't say anything yet. Doubt always spoke first in whispers, and she'd learned not to let whispers control her. Neptune 4 approaching compound, establishing overwatch. The team leader's voice was calm, professional, but something in the way his breath broke on the last word made sit up. Overwatch meant they had eyes on the target, and in this fog, that was almost impossible. She adjusted her headset. Static hissed. A faint pop cracked through the line, maybe interference, maybe something else. Then the silence came, not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that pressed in from all sides. Her grandfather used to say silence was never neutral. It was either a gift or a warning. Neptune 4, breach in 5. The words came clipped, professional. She scribbled the time in her notes. Her heart beat faster, out of rhythm with her breath. Then it happened. Gunfire, sudden, violent. muffled in the fog but unmistakable. Short bursts, then the low, thudding echo of something heavier. Her pencil snapped in her hand. Neptune 4, contact left ridge, multiple shooters. The voices overlapped now, shouting, gunfire cracking against stone. The calm was gone, replaced by urgency by the edge of panic. Designated marksman down. Repeat, our sniper is down. Froze, the words cut like glass. Their sniper was hit. The one man meant to cover them from range gone in the first wave. Static ripped through her headset as overlapping voices collided, stepping on each other. She adjusted dials, filtering, separating. She could hear the team leader barking orders, could hear the ragged edge in a younger operator's voice as he called out enemy positions. She could hear rounds slamming into rock close enough to make their mics pop with each impact. The colonel was packing in the command tent now. Didn't need to look to know. She could feel his boots thudding against the dirt floor behind her. "What's their status?" he demanded. His voice stayed calm, pinned on all sides, sniper down, requesting precision support. The colonel swore under his breath. He knew what she knew. No sniper teams were close enough to help. Air support was grounded in the fog. Artillery was a no-go with the hostage inside the compound. For a second, the operations center was filled with nothing but the sound of gunfire bleeding through radio waves. Men's lives echoing into static. Neptune 4 to base, we're taking heavy fire. We need relief. We can't maneuver. His eyes locked on the map. She could see it like she was there. Ridge lines flanking both sides. Enemy muzzle flashes invisible to the naked eye but painting streaks across her imagination. The seals caught in the trough, unable to pull back, unable to push forward. Her throat went dry. She knew this pattern. She studied it. The valley was a kill box and they were trapped inside it. Something in her chest shifted. A familiar calm, the same she used to feel when she lay in the Montana grass, rifle stock pressed to her cheek, waiting for breath and trigger to meet. She stood slowly, deliberately. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, turning toward Tors, "I can do it." He looked at her like he knew exactly what she meant. The colonel turned, scowling. "Do what?" His voice didn't shake. "Provide precision fire support." The colonel's face went red. "Sit down, Corporal. You're needed on comms." "The fog is lifting on the eastern ridge," she said. "Calm, firm. I've studied the map. 850 meters from here I'll have a line of sight. I can reach them." "Absolutely not," snapped. "This is combat, not the rifle range. You're not walking out there to play sniper." Tors hesitated. His eyes darted to the operations map, to the rising number of red markers where Neptune 4 was pinned, to the wounded tally growing faster than he could track. Staff Sergeant pressed, "If we wait, they die." Her words landed like stone dropped in water. Ripples moved through the tent. Even the colonel hesitated for a beat too long. "Neptune 4, ammo's low. We're losing ground here." The desperation in that voice didn't belong to men who doubted themselves. It belonged to men who knew the math had turned against them. Tors made the call, quiet, steady. "Check out the go." For the first time in hours felt her heart steady, not race, steady. She moved quickly but not rushed, every step rehearsed in her mind 100 times. Into the armory, hands on the heavy rifle. She knew its weight instantly, balanced it like an extension of herself. Ammunition strapped to her vest. Scope adjusted before she even cleared the threshold. She stepped into the fog. The air was cool, damp. It clung to her skin, muffled every sound. She climbed toward the ridge, each step careful, deliberate. Her body moved like it had on the ranch fields years ago, quiet, practiced. Her breath slowed. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, but not from fear, from focus. 850 meters. She'd already done the math. The wind whispered across her face, shifting the edge of the fog just enough to show her the shapes. Muzzle flashes, faint but there. She dropped flat against the dirt, unpacked the bipod, mounted the rifle settled into her shoulder like it was always meant to be there. Through the scope, the world sharpened. Enemy silhouettes crouched along, hidden to the naked eye. She could see their muzzle flashes like stars in the morning haze. She tracked the closest one, machine gunner, pinning Neptune's movement. Her finger brushed the trigger. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her chest. Calm hands, quiet heart. She exhaled slowly and squeezed. The valley thundered. That's 1,570 words. Would you like me to move into part 3? Another 1,500 plus words, where begins taking her shots one by one, holding the seals lives in her steady hands, and we start to see the shift in how everyone views her. You said 3. ChatGPT said. Excellent, now we dive into part 3, 1,500 plus words. This section will capture the intensity of first confirmed kill, the unfolding 20 minutes of methodical fire, the SEALs regaining ground, and her internal conflict balancing calm precision with the weight of lives depending on her. Suspense will carry throughout, with emotional depth and cinematic packing. Here's part 3. Why did the valley fall silent after that first shot? Why, for just a heartbeat, did even the war seem to hold its breath? The crack of the rolled across the mountains like thunder pulled from the sky. Inside her scope, watched the machine gunner fold backward, his weapon tumbling down the slope. One shot. Clean. Final. She didn't celebrate, she didn't move. She only listened. Target down. The call came sharp in her headset from Neptune 4. Relief bled into the voice, clipped by adrenaline but unmistakable. For the first time in minutes, they had breathing space. Adjusted her scope, the rifle's weight pressing steady into her shoulder. Her cheek rested against the stock. Her heartbeat slowed again, finding that rhythm her grandfather had taught her years ago. Calm hands, quiet heart. Through the shifting fog, more muzzle flashes sparked. They were clever, these fighters, using concealment, firing in controlled bursts, never giving away their full positions. But they didn't need much. A spark of light, a glimpse of motion, that was enough. She tracked another figure along the enemy shooter, adjusting his aim, targeting where he thought the SEAL team leader had moved. Her breath slowed, she squeezed again. The man collapsed against stone, his rifle clattering into shadow. Confirmed hit. Ridge North cleared, Neptune reported. The colonel in the operations tent stood frozen. He had stopped packing. Every eye in the room was on his back now, watching the quiet corporal they had dismissed hours ago methodically shift the tide of battle with each steady shot. But didn't feel their eyes. She didn't think of them at all. Her world had narrowed into the scope, into the rhythm of her breath, into the stillness between moments. She shifted, found another muzzle flash, squeezed. A third man fell. Each shot was a decision, a choice, a weight. She felt all of it pressing against her chest, but she carried it the way she carried the rifle, steady, grounded, patient. The SEALs began to move. Their radio traffic grew sharper, cleaner, positions called, movements coordinated. Hope flickered back into their voices. Neptune advancing, east side secure, keep fire on the ridges. Didn't answer, she didn't need to. Her rifle spoke for her. The fog lifted in patches now, revealing more of the battlefield. Through the shifting gray, she caught sight of the compound, a squat, mud-walled structure pressed against the valley floor. Movement inside. The hostage was there. The SEALs were close. But so were the enemy reinforcements. Shapes emerged along the western ridge, shadows multiplying, more muzzle flashes sparking alive. They were adjusting, realizing someone was picking them apart one by one. Steadied, adjusted elevation, exhaled. The roared again, another figure crumpled. She could hear it in her own body, the tension between stillness and chaos. Her hands calm, her breath measured, but her heart ached. Each man she dropped wasn't just a target, They were lives, choices, consequences. Her grandfather had always warned her. The rifle doesn't forgive carelessness. Every trigger pull carries weight. She carried it now, and she didn't falter. Minutes passed, stretched long by fire and silence. 20, maybe more, lost track. She fired sparingly, never wasting a round. Each shot deliberate, measured, confirmed. Through her scope she saw enemy forces begin to waver, positions abandoned, suppression broken. The SEALs pushed forward. Neptune 4 moving. Hostage secure, repeat hostage secure. The words jolted through her headset like electricity. Relief swept her chest, but she didn't let it loosen her focus. The mission wasn't over. Not yet. Because then she saw him. Across the valley, through thinning fog, another figure moved with different purpose. His posture was sharper. His scope glinted faintly in the light. He wasn't spraying rounds blindly. He was waiting, watching. Her stomach sank, a sniper. And he was locked on the SEAL team leader. For a heartbeat felt everything narrow to that single thread. Distance, wind, elevation. She calculated faster than thought, her body doing what it had trained to do since she was a child on that Montana pasture. She saw him adjust, finger tightening on his trigger. She exhaled. The cracked. The enemy sniper fell back lifeless, before his shot ever fired. For a long second didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the radio came alive. Sniper threat neutralized, Neptune is clear, repeat we're clear. Voices carried relief, disbelief. Men who had been seconds from death, now alive because of one shot they hadn't even seen. In the operations tent, the colonel stood motionless. He had no words, none that mattered. Lowered her rifle slightly, her cheek still pressed to the stock. Her breath shook now, not fear, not adrenaline, something deeper. She thought of her grandfather, thought of his lessons, his steady hands guiding hers when she was 8 years old. She thought of every time she had been told she didn't belong, every time someone's doubt cut deeper than any bullet. And then she thought of the SEALs, alive, moving, breathing, because she had refused to stay silent. The helicopters thundered in minutes later, blades chopping the thinning fog. Neptune 4 exfiltrated with their wounded and their rescued medic, every man alive. In her headset, the SEAL team leader's voice broke through, tired, grateful, heavy with the weight of survival. "Base, patch me through to your sniper." The colonel said nothing. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who that was. Swallowed, pressing her mic, "This is Corporal Kellick." The voice on the other end was quiet, steady. "Marine, you saved us. I don't know your story, but I'll be telling it to every man I know. Thank you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but words caught somewhere deep. All she managed was, "Copy." When the line went dead, she finally lifted her cheek from the stock. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her eyes burned from the scope's strain. Her chest felt heavy with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. But she stayed steady. She didn't let anyone see the tremor in her hands. Later, when she returned to the tent, Colonel stood waiting. His face was drawn tight, his eyes unreadable. For a moment it seemed like he might say nothing at all. Then, quietly, he spoke. "You proved me wrong." She didn't answer, didn't need to. Because the valley already had. Why was the silence heavier than the gunfire had been? Why, after saving so many lives, did she feel more hollow than triumphant? The valley was quiet now, except for the distant whir of helicopter blades fatting into the mountains. The firefight had ended less than an hour ago, but already it felt unreal, like a fever dream swallowed by fog. Lay prone a little longer, cheek still pressed against the cooling stock of the. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her breath moved in uneven tremors, though she fought to steady it. She knew she had to get up. She knew the mission was over, the SEALs safe, the wounded on their way to surgical care. She knew all of this, but her body resisted. For a moment she wanted to stay right there, flat against the dirt, the valley stretched out before her, the rifle heavy and silent at her side. Her fingers still tingled with memory. Each shot replayed in her mind. The crack, the recoil, the sight picture dropping, the momentary blur, then the confirmation. Men falling. Lives ending. Lives saved, lives taken. Her grandfather's words echoed again, unbidden. The rifle carries weight. Every pull is a promise. Don't forget that. She hadn't forgotten, but she was only beginning to understand what he had meant. The radio crackled in her headset. Tor's voice steady but softer now. Kellic returned to base. Job done. She pressed her lips together, nodded to no one, and pushed herself up. Dirt clung to her sleeves. Her knees ached from the pressure of lying prone for so long. She broke down with practiced efficiency, sliding it into its case. Each motion was mechanical, precise, because if she let herself think, if she let her mind wander, she wasn't sure she could keep her hands steady. By the time she descended back into the perimeter, the base was a storm of motion. Medevac choppers had returned, ferrying wounded to the field hospital. Marines ran stretchers across gravel, boots pounding. The sharp smell of burned powder still hung in the morning air, mixing with the copper tang of blood. Kept moving, silent, unnoticed. She carried the back toward the sniper section's armory. No one stopped her. No one spoke. The chaos swallowed everything. Inside the comms tent, she set her headset back onto the table. The console still buzzed faintly with chatter, convoys reporting in, routine check-ins resuming, as if war never paused. As if the valley hadn't nearly claimed an entire SEAL team an hour ago. She sat in her chair, rested her hands on her knees, breathed. Only then did the exhaustion hit, a wave so heavy it nearly knocked her forward. Her head dropped into her hands, and for the first time since the first shot, her shoulders shook. Not sobbing, not grief, just the tremor of release after holding steady for too long. She forced herself to stop, forced herself upright. Marines moved in and out of the tent, some throwing her quick glances, others ignoring her entirely. None said a word. But she could feel it, the way their eyes lingered, the whispers that began in low voices at the edges of the room. They knew. Later, when the chaos settled, Tors approached. He crouched beside her chair, his face drawn with fatigue. "You did what no one else could done," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone take that from you." She met his eyes. For a moment she wanted to believe him, wanted to let the words sink in and fill the hollow place inside, but she couldn't, not yet. Because she knew recognition came with a cost, and she wasn't sure she wanted to carry it. By evening, word had spread, not officially, not in reports, but in whispers, in passing glances, in the way SEAL operators walking through the base nodded once at her before moving on, their eyes carrying a weight she couldn't name. Respect, maybe. Gratitude, something heavier. Colonel hadn't spoken to her yet, not since the battlefield had gone quiet. She saw him once across the yard, his expression unreadable. He turned away before their eyes met. She didn't need his words, not then. Instead, she found herself back in the armory after dark. The rested on a rack, gleaming faintly under fluorescent light. She stood there in silence, staring at it, her reflection bent across the metal. She thought about every round she'd fired, each target that had gone still. She thought about the sniper, her final shot, the man who had been seconds from killing the SEAL team leader. She wondered if he'd been trained like she had, if he had been someone's student, someone's granddaughter's enemy. Did he breathe calm before pulling the trigger? Did he believe his purpose was just as clear as hers? The questions didn't have answers. They never did. Still, they stayed with her, lodged like shrapnel in her chest. That night couldn't sleep. The base was quieter now, helicopters stilled, radios low, but her mind replayed everything. The colonel's dismissal, the first trigger pull, the SEAL leader's voice thanking her. And through it all, her grandfather's steady hand on hers, a memory more vivid than the barracks around her. At some point near midnight, Tors found her still awake. She sat outside, boots on the gravel, staring at the dark in the distance. You did good, he said softly. She didn't look at him. I did what I had to. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you saved them, all of them, that matters. She wanted to believe it mattered. She wanted to feel pride. But instead, she felt the weight pressing heavier. Does it? She whispered. Because I keep thinking, every man I dropped had a family too. Tors didn't argue. He didn't try to justify or diminish it. He only sat down beside her, letting silence fill the space. Sometimes silence said more than words. When dawn came, Colonel finally approached her. His apology was brief, stripped of pride but not of sincerity. He admitted his preconceptions, admitted he had been wrong, but heard the unspoken truth. He had doubted her, and that doubt had nearly cost lives. She nodded once, said nothing. Because dignity didn't always speak. Sometimes it just endured. The after-action reports began. Pages filled with technical detail, enemy positions, casualty counts, extraction timelines. Buried among the cold data was one sentence. Marine Corporal provided emergency precision fire support, enabling Neptune 4 to extract hostage and casualties with 0 fatalities. A line, just a line. But behind that line lived the weight of every second, every breath, every trigger pull. As the sun rose again, sat alone in the comms tent. The radios hummed softly, steady as heartbeat. She ran her fingers over the desk, grounding herself. She was Corporal Kellick again, just another Marine, quiet, reliable, invisible. But somewhere in the fog of the valley, in the whispers passing between warriors, a different story had already begun. The story of the girl with the why did their gratitude feel heavier than their silence? Why, after saving them, did she feel more isolated than before? The next morning woke to the sound of boots outside her barracks, SEALs moving across the gravel toward the command post. Their silhouettes cut through the dawn haze, broad-shouldered, weapons slung low. She knew them instantly, not by face but by presence. Men who had been in the valley, men who had heard her shots in the fog. She stayed still in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Part of her wanted to step outside, to meet their eyes, to hear their voices again. But another part, the larger part, told her to remain invisible. She didn't know how to stand in their gratitude without breaking under its weight. By midday, the whispers grew louder. A SEAL operator had stopped by the sniper section, asking who the Marine was that fired support. Another had left a note for Tors, unsigned, with 2 words scrawled in block letters: "Tell her thanks." Recognition came not in ceremonies or medals, but in the small gestures soldiers left behind. A nod across the yard, a quiet word passed down, a silence that carried weight. And yet inside her own unit she felt the difference. Some Marines clapped her on the shoulder, half in respect, half in disbelief. Others avoided her altogether, their silence sharp-edged, like her actions had unsettled the fragile balance of roles and expectations. Colonel remained distant. His apology the day before was the last thing he had said to her. Now he kept his words tight, his gaze even. In the evenings, when the base settled into its restless calm, found herself alone in the comms tent, staring at the hum of the radios. She would rest her hands on the table, her fingers tapping to rhythms no one else could hear. Sometimes she caught herself listening for echoes of the valley, the static of gunfire, the sharp bark of Neptune's voices, ghost sounds that weren't there anymore. One night Tors stepped in, finding her still awake long past midnight. "You're not sleeping," he said simply. She shook her head, "Not really." He pulled up a chair, sitting across from her. "It gets easier. The first time's always the hardest." She looked at him. "The first time what?" His eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady. "The first time you realize your skills mean someone else doesn't go home in a body bag. And the first time you realize it also means someone else never goes home at all." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she already knew that she had grown up with those truths in her grandfather's lessons. but knowing something in theory and carrying it in your chest were not the same. "It doesn't feel like winning," she whispered. "No," Tor said quietly, "it never does." The next day brought visitors, the SEAL team, Neptune 4. They arrived without ceremony, their uniforms still marked by dust, their eyes lined by exhaustion. They didn't come to the colonel's office first. They came to her, straight to the comms tent. Was checking frequency logs when their shadows fell across her table. She looked up, startled, meeting the gaze of men who had walked through fire and come back breathing because of her. Their leader stepped forward, a lieutenant commander, his face lined by both youth and age, young in body, old in the way war had carved itself into his features. "You're Corporal Kellick," he said, "not a question, a fact." She nodded once. He extended his hand. She hesitated before taking it, her grip firm despite the tremor in her chest. "You saved us," he said simply, "all of us. I don't have speeches. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say it." The others nodded behind him. One murmured, "Hell of a shot," his voice carrying a mix of awe and gratitude. Another added, "Didn't think we were getting out until you started dropping them." Swallowed hard. She wanted to say something back, something that matched the gravity of their words, but nothing came. All she managed was, "I just did my job." The lieutenant commander studied her, then shook his head. "You did more than your job, you carried us." The words lodged deep, not like praise, not like recognition, like responsibility, like weight. After they left, the colonel called her into his office. His face was stony, his tone clipped. "You've attracted attention," he said. "Stood at attention, yes, sir. The SEALs are recommending commendation. They've even suggested sniper training." Her heart skipped just once. She kept her face blank. His jaw tightened. "Understand something, Corporal. What happened was extraordinary, but extraordinary is not the standard. You are still a communications specialist. Don't let this distract you." She nodded, "Understood, sir." But inside, a storm swirled, because she did understand. She understood that for him, the neat lines of order mattered more than the truth of what had happened in the valley. For him, roles defined value, and she had broken that balance. That night, lying in her cot, she thought of her grandfather again. She imagined sitting on the porch back in Montana, his old hunting rifle across their knees, the sunrise painting gold across the pasture. She could almost hear his voice. "The world won't always see you, kiddo, but the rifle doesn't care. It only listens to your hands." She closed her eyes. The memory steadied her. But when sleep came, it brought the valley with it. The fog, the muzzle flashes, the man through the scope adjusting his aim at the SEAL leader, her shot cutting his life short. She woke in the dark, her breath heavy, her chest aching. She pressed her palms against her eyes until stars danced in the black. The next morning she carried on. She checked radios, logged frequencies, smiled at no one, spoke when necessary, invisible again. But not completely, because everywhere she went now, whispers followed. The SEALs carried her name with them. Marines murmured when she passed. Even when faces were turned away, she could feel the weight of eyes. She was no longer invisible. She was something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. Why did the paperwork feel heavier than the rifle had? Why did ink on a page weigh more than every trigger she'd pulled in the valley? The commendation process began quietly. A line in an after-action report noted and forwarded. A signature here, a recommendation there. But behind each stroke of the pen lived the echoes of gunfire, the shouts of men caught in fog, the stillness of her breath before every shot. Read none of it. She only heard whispers. Tors told her the SEAL commander had submitted a statement, calling her fire support the difference between life and death. Another officer passed along that her name had reached division headquarters. But the colonel's silence remained louder than any praise. When finally called her in, his words were clinical. "You're being recommended for advanced training. Scout Sniper School." He said it as though reading a weather report, as though this wasn't the dream she had once dared to imagine but buried long ago. Stood at attention, her hands tight against her sides. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, his jaw tight. "Don't mistake this for vindication. You were lucky. You performed under pressure, yes, but luck is not a skill, and the Corps doesn't bend to exceptions." She didn't answer. He leaned forward. "If you go, you will not have the luxury of being invisible anymore. Every eye will be on you. Every failure will be. Do you understand that?" Her throat was dry, she swallowed once. "I understand, sir." But later, sitting alone in the comms tent, she wondered if she truly did. For years, invisibility had been her armor. She had survived being underestimated by slipping beneath notice, by letting her work speak while she stayed silent. But this was different. If she accepted the path ahead, there would be no silence, no shadows to hide in. The SEALs stopped by again before their redeployment. They didn't come with ceremony. They came with quiet respect. One of them, the youngest, pressed something into her hand, a small patch torn from his gear. The Neptune trident stitched in blue. "For when you doubt yourself," he said simply. She turned the fabric over in her fingers long after they left. The threads frayed, the edges worn, a piece of cloth, nothing more. And yet it felt heavier than any metal. Days stretched into weeks, training cycles resumed, missions came and went, and still whispers followed her. Some Marines looked at her differently now, respect in their eyes, yes, but also distance, as if she had stepped into a space they couldn't quite reach. Others muttered resentment, saying she had stolen recognition meant for those whose jobs it was to shoot. Absorbed it all in silence. She still woke each day to radios humming, still checked frequencies with precise efficiency, still carried the weight of her duty like she always had. But at night, in the quiet, she replayed the valley. She could not forget the men who had fallen through her scope. The first time she received official word came in a manila envelope. Orders, transfer to Scout Sniper School. She sat on her cot, the paper trembling faintly in her hands. Torres watched her from the doorway. "You knew this was coming," he said. She nodded, but knowing didn't make it easier. "You deserve it," he added. Her eyes lifted. "Do I?" He held her gaze. "You saved lives, that's what matters. That's what makes you deserve it." But in her chest, the doubt coiled tight. Was saving lives enough to justify the others she had taken? Could recognition erase the weight of what she carried? That night she dreamed of Montana. The pasture at dawn, targets lined up in the mist. Her grandfather's voice steady, guiding her breath. But in the dream, the targets weren't cans or steel plates. They were shadows, men, faces she couldn't see clearly. She pulled the trigger and each one fell. Her grandfather's voice echoed softer now, calm hands, quiet heart. But her hands shook, her heart ached. She woke with tears she refused to acknowledge, wiping them away before anyone could see. The flight stateside was quiet. She stared out the window of the transport, the Afghan mountains shrinking beneath the clouds, their ridges swallowed by distance. She wondered if they would remember her there. The fog, the shots, the whispers of a Marine who should have been invisible but wasn't. As the days became harder. Scout Sniper School was designed to break even the strongest. Endless field exercises, punishing physical demands, brutal marksmanship tests where one mistake meant failure. Carried herself through each day with steady silence. She refused to complain. She refused to falter. But inside, she carried more than the weight of training. She carried the eyes of those who doubted her. She carried the whispers of those who believed in her. And she carried the ghosts of those she had dropped in the valley. One evening, after a grueling stalk exercise, an instructor pulled her aside. His face was unreadable, but his words struck deep. "You shoot like you were born with a rifle in your hands, but that's not enough. The question is, when the moment comes again, can you carry the weight without breaking?" She had no answer, not then. Alone in her bunk, she thought about it. Thought about the SEAL team leader's voice thanking her. Thought about Tor's quiet faith. Thought about's doubt. And thought about her grandfather, who had always said the rifle didn't lie. She gripped the Neptune patch in her hand until her fingers ached. Maybe the answer wasn't about carrying the weight. Maybe it was about never putting it down. Why did the first shot on the range feel heavier than the ones in the valley? Why, surrounded by other snipers in training, did her finger hesitate for half a second longer than it should? Adjusted the scope, the rifle braced against her shoulder. The Virginia air was different from Afghanistan, humid, heavy, laced with pine instead of dust. But the stillness was the same. Stillness before the shot, stillness before judgment. The instructor's voice carried across the line. Targets at 800, fire when ready. Around her, rifles cracked in sequence. Brass casings clinked against gravel. She exhaled, her breath slow and measured and squeezed. The target rang steel, a clean hit. No celebration, no nod of approval, just the next order. That was sniper school, relentless, unyielding. Each day tested not only skill but endurance. Endless stalks through swamps, crawling through mud and reeds for hours with only inches of movement allowed. Ruck marches that tore at shoulders, days where sleep was a memory and food little more than rationed fuel. Bored in silence, she didn't complain, she didn't boast. She moved steady, deliberate, but even in silence she felt the weight of eyes. Some of the men doubted her openly, snide remarks during downtime, questions whispered loud enough to be heard. She's only here because of politics. She's a comms marine, not a shooter. One good day in Afghanistan doesn't make a sniper. She ignored them. She had learned long ago that words couldn't wound if you refused to let them land. Still at night, lying in her bunk, she felt the sting. She carried it alongside everything else. The valley, the men she had dropped, the gratitude of Neptune, the doubt of. It all lived in her chest, heavy but steady, like the rifle itself. During one stalk exercise, she crawled through swamp water for 6 hours, her body submerged to the neck, her rifle held steady above the surface. Insects bit at her skin, leeches clung to her legs, mud filled every crease of her uniform. She moved inch by inch, timing her breaths with the sway of reeds. When she finally reached her firing position, her scope found the observer's silhouette at 800 meters. She slowed her heart, steadied her hands, and squeezed. The blank round cracked, the instructor raised his flag, and she crawled out unseen. Later, one of the doubters muttered, "Must been luck." She let it pass, but the instructors didn't. They had seen, they had marked her. Over time, the mutters grew quieter. Her scores spoke louder, consistent, precise, unwavering. Still, she carried doubt of her own. Not in her skill, never that, but in her heart. Every time she pulled the trigger in training, she remembered the valley, remembered how it had felt when the targets weren't steel plates but men. She saw the sniper through her scope again, seconds away from killing the SEAL team leader. She saw the flash, felt the recoil, and remembered the finality. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, an instructor found her cleaning her rifle alone. He was older, seasoned, his face carved by years of combat. "You know why most people fail out of this school?" he asked. She shook her head. "They think it's about shooting, about crawling through mud and hitting targets at 1,000 yards, but it's not. It's about silence. Silence between heartbeats. Silence between doubt and action. If you can live with that silence, you'll make it. If you can't, you won't." Didn't answer, but she thought about it long into the night. Because silence was what she knew best. Silence in Montana fields with her grandfather. Silence in the comms tent, listening to static. Silence on the ridge in Afghanistan, waiting for breath to steady. She knew silence. She carried it like others carried weapons. By the midpoint of training, even the doubters had grown quiet. One by one, they saw her crawl through stalk lanes unseen, fire shots that rang true, march without falter. She didn't need to argue, didn't need to defend herself. The rifle spoke. The results spoke. Still inside, she carried the valley. During a night shoot, lying prone under the stars, she found herself staring at the target but seeing fog instead. The echoes of Neptune's desperate voices came back. Sniper down. We need support. Her finger hesitated on the trigger, breath caught in her chest. For a moment, she thought she might break. Then she felt the patch in her pocket, the Neptune trident, threads frayed, edges worn. She pressed her fingers against it, grounding herself. She exhaled, fired, hit steel. The hesitation passed, but it left her shaken, because she knew the silence between shots would always carry ghosts. When graduation approached, she stood among the remaining candidates, half the class already gone. She didn't smile. She didn't allow herself pride. She simply stood steady, rifle at her side, eyes forward. The instructors called her name. Kellick, top 5%, natural shooter, quiet under pressure. She accepted the certificate, the badge, the recognition. But in her chest she carried not triumph but weight. Afterward, one of the men who had doubted her early on approached. His voice was low, stripped of mockery. "You earned it," he said simply. She nodded once, nothing more. That night, alone in her bunk, she finally let herself close her eyes without fighting sleep. She dreamed not of the valley this time, but of Montana, of her grandfather's voice, steady as always, calm hands, quiet heart. For the first time in months, she woke without shaking. But she knew the silence would never leave her. Because silence was where she lived, and where she would always return. Why did stepping back into combat feel different this time? Why, after all the training, did the air taste heavier, as if the world itself knew what she carried now? Stood at the edge of another valley, months after sniper school had ended. The land was different, rockier, harsher, but the silence was the same. Silence between breaths, silence before choices. Her rifle rested steady against her shoulder. Through the scope, the world narrowed again. Angles, distances, breaths. She saw movement in the ridges, enemy fighters slipping into positions, unaware that eyes tracked them from farther than they could imagine. She didn't hesitate. She exhaled, squeezed. The shot rang true. Around her, the sniper team moved in quiet efficiency. Spotters called corrections. Partners checked wind. Every man treated her as they treated one another, no more, no less. That was what struck her most. Not the respect, not the recognition, but the absence of doubt. Her skill had spoken, and finally it had been heard. But inside remained the same. Each shot still carried weight. Each life taken still pressed against her chest. She didn't celebrate, she didn't boast. She did her job, steady, silent. After the mission, as they packed up gear and trekked back toward the forward operating base, one of her teammates spoke quietly beside her. "Word is," he said, "the SEALs still talk about you. Tell the story every time they brief new guys." The girl with the didn't answer. She kept walking, boots crunching over stone. Later, in the quiet of her bunk, she pulled the Neptune patch from her pocket. The fabric was frayed now, worn thin from being carried through every training day, every mission. She ran her thumb along its edges, thinking of the voices in the valley, the desperate calls, the stillness between shots. It never left her. Recognition came in waves. A commendation pinned on her uniform. A quiet handshake from an officer who once doubted her. Letters sent home with her name in them, filtered through whispers into stories larger than the truth. But none of that mattered as much as the silence. Because when she closed her eyes, she didn't see medals or ceremonies. She saw Montana mornings, her grandfather's weathered hands guiding hers on the rifle. She heard his voice, calm hands, quiet heart. She thought of him often now, wondered what he would say if he knew how far she had carried his lessons, wondered if he would recognize the woman she had become, the Marine who had once been invisible, who had found herself in the stillness of a valley shrouded in fog. One evening, after a long mission cycle, Colonel found her again. He had aged in those months, the lines in his face deeper, his tone quieter. "You proved me wrong twice over," he said. She looked at him, expression steady. He added almost reluctantly, "I don't say this often, but you made me see things differently. You made the Corps see things differently." She gave a small nod. "It was never about proving you wrong, sir." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "No, it was about doing the job, and you did it better than anyone could ask." After he left, she sat alone, staring out at the horizon where the sky bled into desert. She thought of how far she had come, from the ranch in Montana, to the comms tent in Afghanistan, to the sniper teams where silence ruled. And she thought of what it all meant. War had not made her proud. It had not filled her with glory. It had not erased the doubts or the weight of what she had done. But it had taught her something deeper. That strength was not loud. That dignity was not measured by recognition. That the truest victories were the ones carried quietly, unseen, unspoken. She looked down at the Neptune patch one last time, the threads nearly falling apart. She tucked it back into her pocket, close to her chest. And as the night fell, she breathed steady, calm hands, quiet heart. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.